Good morning. I'm Susan Bridges, the current president of the Brewster Ponds Coalition. Welcome, members and friends, to the Brewster Ponds Coalition 6th annual meeting. We are so happy that you have joined us today. I wish that we could be at Captain's Golf Course again like last year, visiting with each other in person and having a nice breakfast, but these are different times and we need everyone to stay safe. So we're having a Zoom meeting, and I'd like to thank Dan Goldstein for his invaluable help editing our very first virtual meeting. I'd also like to thank Michael Layton Realty, our business partner, for sponsoring our annual meeting this year. So let's start by looking at today's agenda. First, I'll introduce the board. Then we'll review this year's accomplishments. After that, Tom Vautin will lead us through the business portion of the meeting, followed by the presentation of the 2020 Splash Award, and finally, our keynote speaker, Sofia Fox, who will be talking to us about the impact of climate change on freshwater ponds. So, starting with the 2019-20 board, here we are. Susan Bridges and Steve McKenna, co-presidents, Konrad Schultz, vice president, Gwen Pelletier, clerk, Tom Vautin and Rob Condon, treasurer, Marty Burke, Wayne Jenkins, Nancy Ortiz, Judy Pirani, and last but not least, Sue Searles. Thank you, board members, for all of your hard work and many accomplishments this year. You are truly an amazing group of people. And now I'd like to introduce our new board members, Jack Clark, Cameron Ferguson, Mary Matterstock, and Bruce Swarin. You've probably read their bios on the registration page for this meeting or on our website. So rather than go into any great detail about each, I will just say that the Brewster Ponds Coalition is very fortunate to have 4 such outstanding new board members with varied and valuable work experiences, a shared interest in the environment and giving back to their community, and a love of the outdoors. Welcome, new board members. We are very pleased that you've joined us, and we'll look forward to working with you. And now I'd like to take a few minutes talking about our accomplishments. But first, let me remind you of our mission, which is to preserve the health, beauty, and enjoyment of Brewster's beautiful freshwater ponds. The Brewster Ponds Coalition does this by providing education to both adults and children, fundraising and assisting with scientific research to understand what is happening with our freshwater ponds and why, and also, very important, we support pond remediation projects. Like all organizations this spring, the Brewster Ponds Coalition was forced to cancel all of our in-person events, including our social/volunteer fair and our pond summit. Sadly, we were also unable to host the pond education field trips for 2nd and 5th graders in the Brewster Public School systems. This is one of our signature programs. Our committee and volunteers, led by Sue Searles, had everything in place and ready to go, and we even had a new business sponsor for the field trips, John O'Reilly Engineering. But the schools were closed and the trips were canceled. However, we do hope to get back on track next year. Another signature program, Citizen Science, has been scaled back. Due to the need to socially distance, testing of ponds for cyanobacteria is being done by APCC, the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, again this year, but without the help of Brewster Ponds Coalition volunteers. Instead of the 26 ponds that we had hoped to test, only 8 are being tested regularly by APCC. Admittedly, these cancellations sound discouraging, but let me tell you why I'm still very excited. First, related to citizen science, we are very excited about our collaboration with LimTex and the University of New Hampshire on a new food web study at Lower Mill Pond. The Brewster Ponds Coalition is funding 100% of this project, and 2 of our board members, Marty Burke and Gwen Pelletier, are doing the bi-weekly testing. Look for more information about this project in future newsletters and on our website. Also, we are actively monitoring ponds for harmful cyanobacteria, even if the Brewster Ponds Coalition volunteers are not doing the biweekly testing. Marty Burke and Gwen Pelletier, our board members leading the Citizen Science Program, are sending out monthly updates to our members and friends, encouraging them to check their ponds and report anything that looks out of the ordinary. So far this summer, we've received requests to look at possible situations at Walker's Pond, Cobb's Pond, Seymour Pond, and Griffith Pond. And as a result of their follow-up, confirmed levels of cyanobacteria have been found at Walker's and Seymour Pond. Marty has been working with APCC and Amy Van Horn of the Brewster Department of Health to post warnings and alert neighborhoods about these ponds. Second, we are currently assisting 3 neighborhood associations with their pond remediation projects. The associations include the Robinwood Association at Owl Pond, the Friends of Elbow Pond, and the Save Lower Mill Pond group. These projects include stormwater remediation involving the construction of retention basins and rain gardens, and in the case of the Elbow Pond group, harvesting aquatic plants in order to remove phosphorus from the ponds and sediment. We've helped in different ways depending on what was needed. We've helped planning projects, providing publicity, recruiting volunteers, and for all 3 projects, we are providing financial support by holding contributed funds as tax-deductible donations in a Brewster Ponds Coalition bank account. Helping neighborhood associations plan and execute remediation projects like these is an important part of what we do. So if any of you today belong to an association and would like help, I urge you to contact us. Also this year, the Brewster Ponds Coalition has partnered with the town of Brewster to share the cost of a stormwater remediation engineering study at Walker's Pond. And we contributed $2,000 to the Brewster Conservation Trust towards the purchase of pond front property on Slough Pond. The purchase of this parcel is very important because it means a buildable lot will remain open space and not in danger of pollution from septic systems and lawn and garden fertilizers. Finally, in addition to the educational, research, and remediation projects just mentioned, Brewster Pond volunteers and the board have worked very hard this year to increase our membership by 110% and donations by 133%. We've actively sought business partnerships for the first time and now have 6. We've updated our website. We published the 2020 Pond Guide and launched a new trail monitoring program. But we're not done yet. We have 3 outdoor socially distanced events planned for later this summer. 2 are eco paddle fundraisers with our business partner Safari. The first is a daytime paddle with naturalist Peter Troll on August 22nd. And the second is going to be an evening glow lit paddle on September 19th. We've also planned a free native plant and alternative lawn workshop at Crocker Nurseries, another business partner of ours, on September 9th. We'll be sending more information about these events as the dates approach. This is quite a long list of accomplishments, programs, and events, and I want you to know that the Brewster Ponds Coalition couldn't do any of this without you, our donors, and our volunteers. As an all-volunteer organization, each and one of our accomplishments is the direct result of your contributions, your time, and your effort. Thank you so much for supporting our mission. And now I'd like to turn the business portion of our meeting over to Tom Vautin.
I hope you've had a chance to review the minutes of the 2019 annual meeting and the summary financial report that we've posted on the BPC website. Although we are not able to meet in person this year, we want to make sure you have as much information as possible about the BPC. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or any of our directors. Our contact information is also on the BPC website. I would like to highlight a few key numbers from our most recent fiscal year, which ended on December 31st, 2019. Additional details can be found on our annual Form 990, which is filed with the IRS and the Massachusetts Attorney General. A copy of this information is available also on the BPC website. So last year was another record for support from our donors, with a total of $61,395 received by the BPC for our various educational programs and restricted project accounts. This is an increase of 45% over the prior year and continues a strong trend of growth of commitment from our ever-expanding community supporting our mission to protect the health, beauty, and enjoyment of Brewster's Ponds. Our expenses last year totaled $36,847, of which $22,514 was for direct program expenses for education, water quality protection, and pond remediation. Our fundraising costs were $3,911, mostly attributable to the printing and mailing of our annual publication of Ripples, which is sent to all Brewster property owners. Other expenses included account services, insurance, association memberships, and technology. Our balance sheet is strong. At the end of last year, the BPC had $57,388 in unrestricted funds and $21,915 in restricted accounts held for specific projects. As an all-volunteer organization, your board works very hard to keep costs as low as possible in order to advance our program activities and build capacity to grow. In addition to your financial support, the value of our volunteers cannot be overstated. In 2019, in addition to our board members' time leading the organization, BPC volunteers collectively contributed at least 2,800 hours to our projects. Financially, this is the equivalent of nearly $90,000 based on official data for Massachusetts nonprofits. Simply put, this is huge. I want to personally thank all of you who have contributed your time and effort to the BPC. Our success truly depends on you. As I mentioned, BPC financial data can be viewed on our website, and I am happy to answer any specific questions. Please feel free to email me and I will respond promptly. And one last note, in accordance with our bylaws and after completing 2 full terms as a BPC director, I will be stepping down from our board this year. It has been an enormous privilege to be part of this great organization, and I want to thank you all for making the BPC so successful. I'm very pleased that Rob Condon has taken on the important role as the BPC treasurer. Rob has made this a smooth transition, and I am sure he will do a great job for the BPC. So thank you all again for your support and commitment to our important work.
This year, 3 board members are concluding their service to the Brewster Ponds Coalition, and it's my pleasure to thank and honor each of them. Steve McKenna joined our board and stepped up immediately to serve as co-president, along with current president Susan Bridges. Steve has been actively involved in environmental protection and management since 1995, when he began working with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. He currently serves at the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management as Cape Cod and Islands Regional Coordinator. Steve served as our liaison to the Brewster DNR and to the Compact of Conservation Trusts on Cape Cod, and we will miss him. Steve has kindly offered to help out with BPC projects in the future, and we certainly look forward to that. Thank you, Steve. It's been my great pleasure to serve closely with the next 2 individuals for many years. Judy Pirani has been our communications director for the past 5 years. Judy started off in June 2015 as a comm team volunteer, a writer, and an editor, and she quickly showed her commitment to the BPC by joining as a board member. Judy's organizational, writing, editing, and photography skills are superb. She's been responsible for producing our annual Ripples publication, all of the BPC newsletters, and our news blog. She's our Facebook guru, and she does a lot of the photography that you see on the BPC website and collaterals and so much more. She's also volunteered for nearly every event the BPC has ever had. Judy's really taken our communications to another level, and we are really sad to see her go, but wish her the very best in the future. Judy, please accept this gift certificate to Crocker Nurseries and this plant as kind of a symbol of our appreciation. We hope you and me enjoy something nice in your new home's landscaping.
All right. Thank you so much.
Finally, there's just not enough words to describe what a big role Tom Vautin has played in growing the BPC and bringing us to the point we are today. Tom joined the board in 2015 and, to his surprise, was immediately and unanimously voted by the board to become our president, something I think he's always held against me. But it was really clear to all of us how capable Tom is. Tom brings a tremendous skill set, which includes engineering, management from his years in a variety of leadership roles at Harvard University, and later as a consultant to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Tom has been with and improved every facet of this organization in ways that will impact it for years to come, from instructing school children to informing town leaders on pond issues, to contributing financial resources, to contributing creating a special strategic plan for this group. He served as president, teacher, PALS pond tester, DNR liaison, treasurer, and liaison to the Cape Cod Collaborative of Conservation Trusts. And I should note that when we got Tom, we really got a 2-for-1 deal too, because Tom's wife, Shirley, has also played an important role in many events and educational programs as a creator and volunteer and a positive motivator. Tom, we know you're not going anywhere and have more pond projects in your head for the future, but on behalf of the entire board, I want to thank you so much for all you've done for this group and for Brewster. And through the miracle of virtual meetings, please accept this framed photograph of your favorite sheep pond as a token of our appreciation. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
A few words, Tom?
Oh, I'm stunned. Thank you. This is lovely. It's been an absolute privilege to have worked with all of you, and to see what this organization has done over the past 6 years is just phenomenal, and it's really due to the dedication and the hard work of every single one of you. So thank you very much for everything you've done.
Good morning. I'm Sue Searles, board member and Pond Education Program Coordinator. And I'm also today the Splash Award presenter. For those of you who have never attended our annual meeting before, the Splash Award is given to one of our members who has raised up the bar, then jumped over it by contributing selflessly, consistently, and generously of their own time, energy, and resources in furtherance of one or more of our programs, and thereby in furtherance of our mission. So let's get to it.
Are you a box turtle or what kind of turtle are you? Oh, you look all amazing. You look delightful. Thank you so much. So cool. Well, we are here to present you Karen Malchus Benjamin with the 2020 annual Brewster Pond Coalition Splash Award. Oh, thank you. With much congratulations and appreciation from all of the board members as well as all of our members. I'm very proud. Thank you very much. Delightful. We have a turtle. Congratulations. I can't imagine. Karen has followed her passion for freshwater ponds throughout her studies, career, and research. She brought that experience home to Brewster as one of the founding members of the Brewster Ponds Coalition in 2014. Serving as the first president of the board of directors, she led us in the creation of our first 2 signature programs. The Citizen Science program coordinates with and supports research by the Center for Freshwater Biology at the University of New Hampshire to determine the presence of cyanobacteria in Brewster's freshwater ponds. Through this program, BPC volunteer citizen scientists take water samples from May through September that are then analyzed by UNH research staff and the Association to Preserve Cape Cod to determine the presence of cyanobacteria. The program has expanded from water samples to aerosol samples and now to food web samples this year. Secondly, in 2017, Karen channeled her love for ponds and teaching along with her creative genius, limitless energy, knowledge, and experience in education and limnology, and reached out to the Brewster Public Schools to form a partnership. I have to lift up my mask. The result was the formation of the BPC Pond Education Program, whose volunteers work to provide all 2nd and 5th grade students with classroom pond curriculum materials and a hands-on pond-side experience. Through this program, the BPC has transported over 380 students to the pond, where our volunteers have entertained them with a pond puppet show, escorted them on a pond-side tour, and assisted them in observing and identifying pond life. None of this would have been possible without the inspiration, energy, persistence, and creative genius of Karen Malchus Benjamin.
I'm smiling.
And both of these programs continue to serve our community today. Thank you, Karen.
Good morning. I'm Marty Burke. I'm on the board of the Brewster Ponds Coalition and involved in our citizen science and membership programs. First, I'd like to give a big thanks to you, our donor members, for your interest in our mission, your volunteerism, and your attendance at this, our 2020 annual meeting, and the first time we've done one virtually. As donors, you have been with us throughout this difficult year. The pandemic underscores the importance of volunteer organizations to offer essential help to important causes right here in our community. Our cause of protecting freshwater ponds is critical at this time. The entire board applauds your support. Thanks also to the Town of Brewster Health Department and the Town of Brewster Natural Resources Department, who have supported our mission and projects from the beginning. I'm pleased this morning to introduce our keynote speaker, Sofia Fox, aquatic ecologist with the National Park Service. Sofia is a Cape Codder and works for the Park Service at the Cape Cod National Seashore right here in Wellfleet. Much of Sofia's published research addresses climate change, which is one of the most critical concerns of this century. I reached out, Sofia took my call, and immediately agreed to speak to us. It was wonderful. We are very lucky to have her and the team at the National Seashore, who are dedicated civil servants and work for us all. Sofia is an aquatic ecologist, has a PhD and MA from Boston University, and has been with the Cape Cod National Seashore for 11 years. She is involved in scientific monitoring and research in the park's freshwater and coastal ecosystems. She focuses on understanding and predicting natural and human-driven changes to these ecosystems. Please welcome Sofia Fox, who will talk to us about the effect of climate change on freshwater ponds.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. It has been a great challenge and pleasure to figure out how to connect virtually with everybody during this time, and I'm really happy that we've been able to figure out a way to bring me to you. My name is Sofia Fox, and I am the aquatic ecologist at Cape Cod National Seashore. I have been here at the Seashore for 11 years. And this interaction that we're having today, if you can call it that, is something that I can consider to be critical to my job, to get out there and talk with you all who are engaged in understanding your ecosystems, your pond ecosystems, getting involved in doing work to protect them and improve them. And so it's with that in mind that I'm here today talking to you. So thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. So I'm gonna, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you all. Hopefully all of the technology will work. Okay, hopefully that worked. So I'm here to talk to you about the ponds of Cape Cod. As a national seashore scientist, my work primarily focuses on in the ponds within the seashore. So it's mainly from that point of view that I'll be talking to you today, but everything that I'm talking about is easily extendable to the ponds in your community in Brewster. So Cape Cod ponds, a record of change. And here is a beautiful picture of a pond ecosystem. So as you all may know, there are over 1,000 ponds on Cape Cod. That is a really unique landscape. There are only a few locations globally that can represent this type of magnitude of ponds. Long Island is a similar landscape that has a lot of these kettle ponds, but we are really unique globally. And here in Brewster, you guys have the most ponds, I think, on the Cape. And I think Long Pond, although you share it with Harwich, may be one of the largest ponds on the Cape. So your landscape is really speckled with ponds, both large and small. Our ponds are teeming with life, from everything from the phytoplankton up to our small invertebrates, our dragonfly and other insect larvae, to the dragonflies flying around, our zooplankton, fish, birds. Anybody who spent time on the ponds knows that they're just teeming with life. And many of us are lucky enough to also have herring runs on our local ponds, including you guys. So what I'd like to impress upon you today is that these ponds don't sit alone in the landscape. They're connected to everything around. So when we think of them, we can't think of them alone. We have to think of them in their context, which is including the shorelines, all of the animals that use them and live in them. Some of you may be fortunate enough to live on the pond, so you are part of their landscape. You may use the pond. When you are on the pond, you become part of the landscape. And then, of course, everything that's going on in the muddy bottoms of our ponds, which I had to add here, they left that out. That's a really vibrant place in a pond ecosystem. And they're all connected. Not one of these pieces is in isolation. In addition to landscape connectivity, our ponds are hydrologically connected by water to their surroundings. The ponds here on Cape Cod have glacial origins. They're formed by ice blocks that were left when the glaciers receded along the landscape. And those ice blocks cause depressions as the glacial till was left behind. These ice blocks melted and left these depressions along the landscape, which then actually filled with our water table. So the groundwater came up and filled these depressions. And so the ponds that we see today are actually continuous with our groundwater table. They are connected completely with that system. And so when we think about them, we really need to be thinking about them as connected with our groundwater. This hydrologic connectivity includes connections to the nutrients in our groundwater. Many of you have heard of nitrogen and phosphorus. They come in through the groundwater, and they're absolutely essential to life in our ponds. the plant matter, whether it's the plants that you see on the shoreline or the phytoplankton that live in the water column, they all depend completely on these nutrients coming from the landscape as well as from the mud on the bottom of the ponds. And so we'll be talking a little bit about these nutrients in the ponds, but the right amount of nutrients is absolutely essential for the ponds as we know it and life in these ecosystems. And what we have in the ponds is just this interconnected web of animals, both large and microscopic, to our landscapes and to organisms that carry those nutrients and resources throughout the ecosystem. In addition to being connected to the landscape, our landscape is connected to the region through atmospheric transport. So materials are moving through the atmosphere and can be deposited on our landscape through regional processes. We have seen major changes in the atmosphere from industrialization of the globe. And one of the major changes we've seen has been the increases in surface temperatures. This is a graphic on the left that I pulled from NASA, which shows the temperature difference compared to pre-industrial times of the Earth, which has been an increase of about 4 degrees Fahrenheit on average in our region. And our region is one of the fastest warming parts of the globe. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through our conversation today, as well as we think about our futures. So temperatures here are higher than average and increasing faster than average. And these temperatures have been found, these temperature increases have been found to be the result of human-induced emissions, in particular the carbon emissions. And I encourage you to go to the NASA website. This is pulled from a visualization where you can look at the change over time, and you can watch the Earth warm really starting in the mid-1980s and continue to present. And what this really looks like more locally is that here we are in Massachusetts. You can see what Massachusetts, say, looked like in the last century or late last century, and what, with this warming temperature, what the climate will look like as we move into the future. And what we see is that there's a higher emission scenario and a lower emission scenario here. We are currently following the higher emission scenario, so we've already reached the climate of about New York, what we all thought in the 80s and 90s New York was like. That's what we're like now. And as we move through the century, we will be heading southward, and really, if we don't do anything to stop it, we're going to be starting to look like South Carolina by the end of the century. So that's a huge shift in what the climate looks like in Massachusetts. In addition to temperatures, we've also seen clear declines in our emissions from our electric power sector. Sulfate and nitrous oxides are emitted into the atmosphere from power generation, mainly from fossil fuels. And what we've seen with the Clean Air Act is that we've seen a major reduction in these emissions into the atmosphere, showing the effectiveness of this regulation in cleaning our air over the last couple of decades. So what does this mean for Cape Cod? What have we seen here? I'm going to take you through some of the research that we've been doing out at the National Seashore, looking at some of the atmospheric changes and the impacts on our lakes and ponds. And these are some of our publications. What we've seen is that our local conditions really reflect the changes in the atmosphere. Here we have a site in North Truro where we've been measuring the deposition of materials through precipitation since about 1980. So we have a very long record of what has been falling on our landscape through rain. And what we've seen is from the 1980s to, this is through a few years ago, we've seen the pH of our rain increase significantly, which means that it's becoming much less acidic. And what we've seen is our sulfate and nitrate in our rain, these power plant emissions, have also declined significantly over time. And so we're seeing an improvement in our atmospheric conditions that is leading to an improvement on the quality of the rain falling on our landscape. And this has led to a pretty much elimination of the acid rain problem that we had in the 80s. We've also at this site examined air temperatures in the region. And what we've found is that over the last, say, 40 years, looking at the summer and fall temperatures, what we've seen is the maximum air temperature and the average air temperature really haven't changed a whole lot. But what we've really seen is that the minimum air temperatures have been increasing, which essentially means that the evenings and the nights are not getting as cold as they used to. So that means the surface temperature is staying warmer. So our low temperatures are just not as low as they were, which leads to an overall increase in temperature. And what we've seen is that that temperature has increased at least 1 degree Celsius over this time period, sometimes a little more on average, and that really is about 2 to 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit, which on these timescales is quite significant, especially if you're a pond. So what is going on in our ponds as a result of all of these changes? At Cape Cod National Seashore, we have been monitoring the water quality in our ponds since the 1970s. And this really gives us a unique opportunity to measure the changes in our ponds. We have I believe the longest freshwater water quality data set in the nation. And we've been really using that and applying it to understand these changes that are going on globally and nationally, and how we can actually measure them locally in our ponds here. And we've been going out for all these years, sampling a whole set of environmental parameters, many of the things that you guys would be familiar with: temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, the transmission of light through the water column, nutrients, the phytoplankton biomass, which is the amount of phytoplankton in the water, among many other parameters. And what we've seen is that this is just a subset of some of our ponds, is that since the 80s, we've seen the pH in our ponds increase significantly. In some cases, almost a whole pH point, which would be being 10 times less acidic than they used to be. And this is really driven, again, by the deposition of these emission particles, the sulfate and the nitrous oxides that are coming down in rain, in precipitation. And what we've seen is that in our waters, we've measured a reduction in sulfate over this period of time, which really is closely connected to what we're seeing in our atmospheric rain deposition data, which I've just put there at the top. So what we're measuring in the waters of our ponds here in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, is mirroring what we're measuring in rain falling across the region, which is largely influenced by power plant emissions across the Northeast and the Midwest. So this is a huge connectivity of our landscape. To really further this message of how connected we are to what's going on so many miles away, a number of years ago, a study was done looking at the record of atmospheric conditions in accumulating sediments in our pond. And this was done in Snow Pond in Truro. And what they did was they took cores into the sediments where they kept intact the depth of the core. And that depth, how deep you are in the mud, really tells you, can be linked directly to a year in time, because the pond is constantly laying down more and more sediment each year. And so as you dig deeper, you can date that mud and put a year to it. And so the deeper we go in the sediment, the farther back in time we go. And in this case, this sediment core that I'm going to show you goes back to about 1500. And what I'm going to show you here are the concentrations of some heavy metals in the mud in Snow Pond in Truro, including arsenic, lead, selenium, and lithium. And what we can see is that we can track human development and industrialization of the landscape in the mud in a pond in Truro. And so what we see is we can see the Industrial Revolution. We can see the increase in metals going into the atmosphere and then being deposited on our landscape in the mud in the pond in Truro. We can see that lead in the muds in Truro begin to increase around the time that we began using automobiles. We can see that at the time that we went to unleaded gasoline, we can see lead disappear from the mud in Truro, which means that it wasn't no longer accumulating in the atmosphere and being deposited on the landscape. So this really drives home the connectivity that these ponds have to what's going on immediately around them and to a larger system of connections to the regional changes in the atmosphere that are going on, in some cases, over 1,000 miles away. And now I'm going to kind of shift gears away from some of these atmospheric changes in terms of the chemicals in the atmosphere and move towards some of the changes we're seeing in the atmosphere related to climate and what's going on. What are the potential impacts of that on our ponds? So we know that the air temperatures have been warming, as I showed you earlier. And so what we wanted to know is, are the pond water temperatures also increasing as the air temperatures are increasing? And the answer is yes. As a scientist, you do not get data better than this. So we were just floored. These are a couple of ponds here in Wellfleet, where we have the air temperature and the water temperature showing an absolutely perfect relationship. So what's going on with the air temperatures is absolutely identically reflected in the water temperatures of our ponds. And when looking at this closely, what we found is that over about a 20 or so year period, we've seen an increase of 2 to 5 degrees over this period of time. And so that may not sound like a lot, and this is an annual average. So, but if you're a pond critter or a phytoplankton or a cyanobacteria, this is a lot of an increase in temperature. So what might this look like in our ponds? The higher air temperatures have led to higher pond water temperatures. So what's going on with our living organisms? Changes in air temperature, precipitation, and drought can alter pond water temperatures. And these are all features that we expect to be changing in the coming decades, have already seen major changes. Higher incidence of droughts, potentially more precipitation, certainly the makeup of our precipitation, and continued increases in air temperature. They will certainly alter our phytoplankton communities. And that alteration will largely come in the form of increases in phytoplankton abundance, so more green water, less clear water, and changes in the community structure of our phytoplankton. So we may see that some species really do well when it gets warmer and other species don't, and those species may become dominant. And this is also influencing what's going on with our cyanobacteria communities in our ponds. Cyanobacteria are a natural part of our pond communities, but what we're seeing more recently in the last several years is that the cyanobacteria are doing very well, and we're seeing these blooms that are a public health concern for us. So we really are very concerned, and we're trying to learn as much as we can about when they're there and why they're there. And so what we're seeing is that with climate change, we're likely to be seeing potential decline in water clarity and quality, including some issues that are really of public health concern. And these changes that we're seeing, and let me go back, and you guys at Brewster Ponds Coalition are really on the Cape at the leading edge of understanding what's going on with cyanobacteria in ponds, and I will be following what you're doing closely. And these changes we're seeing at the base of the food web in the plants and phytoplankton communities will move up the food web. Absolutely everything above them depends on feeding on them, and if they aren't feeding directly on them, they're feeding on something that did. Us at the higher parts of the food web, we can't feed from the sun, but we rely on those that can. So this is really important. And again, Brewster Ponds Coalition at the leading edge, really understanding how the cyanobacteria toxins are moving through the food web of the ponds. That's some really exciting work that I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes. And as we all know, I happen to be fortunate enough to live here in Wellfleet, within the National Seashore, and I have a private beach on the pond. So me and my family, we enjoy the pond tremendously. We spend, right now, almost every afternoon there, so I completely love the ponds. And they provide this enjoyment to so many people. And as a result, they experience significant human use. And those of us who have been out on the ponds know what this use might look like. We've seen it. We've seen these ponds have shoreline impacts, a lot of erosion, a lack of vegetation, trees falling because their roots have been completely undermined, trails along the edges of ponds where people have been walking and removing vegetation. And all of these things do contribute to really undermining the resiliency of these ecosystems to all the changes that are coming at them. And so going back to the effects of climate on change, what else might we expect as the air temperatures and the pond water temperatures continue to increase in these ponds? What kind of changes are we anticipating? And have we already really started seeing? And this is a really important feature of ponds. Higher pond water temperatures are altering the length of pond layer formation. And for those of you who are very versed in ponds, you'll know the term pond stratification. And really what this means is, and this is a natural formation for most of the ponds that we all know, that the ponds stratify, they divide up into layers every summer, late spring, summer season. And these layers are formed and they're maintained throughout the season. And they're really driven by there being a warm surface layer that's heated up by the sun that is separated from a cold bottom layer that never sees the sun, and a mixing zone in the intermediate layer. And this formation is driven by density differences between warm water and cold water. Cold waters are heavier, so they sink to the bottom. Warm waters are lighter, so they stay at the top. And this stratification leads to a condition in most of our ponds, which can be considered natural in many cases, that leads to very low oxygen in the bottom waters of our ponds because the waters on the bottom are completely separated from the oxygenated air at the surface. And that lack of oxygen has major impacts for plants and animals that rely on oxygen, which is all of them. So, so at the Seashore, we were really interested in understanding how climate was impacting pond stratification, because pond stratification sets up a pretty stressful situation for pond life. And what we found, I don't want you to focus too much on this figure, but what we found, these are all proxies for the strength of stratification. So how hard will it be for stratification to break and for a pond to mix? And what we've found in our ponds is that stratification has become stronger and more stable over time, which means that the conditions to remix the pond at the end of the summer season that the natural pond ecosystem depends on for survival have become stronger, which means that pond stratification is lasting longer and longer and longer. And this lengthened and strengthened stratification leads to a much more stressful environment for our pond ecosystems. So to pull it all together, pond ecosystems are complex and very closely connected to the surrounding landscape and the surrounding region through the atmospheric connectivity. Plants and algae are essential components at the base of the food web. A certain amount of them is absolutely required for all life in the pond, along with the nutrients and the sunlight that feed them. We are observing and expecting to see more climate-related changes in our ponds. Changes to pond biological structure in the phytoplankton, the cyanobacteria, and the shoreline plant biomass, the amount of it, and the communities. Who's there? Who dominates our communities? And that will lead to changes in our food web relationships and how toxins and energy moves through these systems. The changes to the pond physical structure. We're seeing warmer waters, longer stratification. I didn't get into it today, but alteration of the water levels. So many of our pond shoreline plants, which are critical for these ponds, many of them are even endemic, which means they're only found in this area. So they're very special. They're listed, state listed species because they're rare. Those really rely on a certain water level or range of water levels along the pond shoreline. We're observing more shoreline erosion and potential declines in water clarity. So we all know kettle ponds are critical natural resources. And as I said earlier, they're absolutely a unique feature of the landscape, and we are so fortunate to have so many of them here on Cape Cod and you guys in Brewster. They are having substantial and significant changes in response to local and atmospheric changes. Continued monitoring and research are so important to understand and protect these resources. And this is where I want to give a huge shout out to the Brewster Ponds Coalition, because you guys are the envy of Cape Cod pond protection groups, and the work that you're doing in the areas of research and education and monitoring, citizen science work, volunteers, is really a model for everybody to reach towards. And I'm extremely impressed. And I want to also point out that the changes that we're seeing are really exacerbated by the human impacts that we're doing locally. And so the more impacts that we have locally, whether it's by adding nutrients to the ponds from wastewater or fertilizer runoff, or whether it's destruction of the shoreline plant communities, or those are some of the main ones, I guess. Those things are really contributing, those features of the ponds really add to their ability to be resilient to the changes related to climate and other things that may be thrown their way. So anything we can do to really maintain their stability and improve their stability will help these ponds into the future. So now I have a little time for questions. And I actually received some questions by email, so I'm going to go through and answer some of those right now. So the first question I have, excuse me. We live near a pond and wonder if there is a way to get involved with the assessment of our pond and its overall health. Absolutely. I encourage each and every one of you who's interested to get involved. And as I just said, the Brewster Ponds Coalition is a great way for you to do that if you're in Brewster. If you're not in Brewster and you want to get involved in your local community, there are similar organizations across the Cape. And the work that's being done at this level is absolutely, we're learning so much from the work that you all are doing. So please do get involved, contact your local ponds group, and there's opportunities to get involved in citizen science monitoring, research, and education programs. And if you don't want to get involved physically, there's always opportunities to donate. So definitely do get involved. Second question. The Brewster Ponds Coalition has been focused on asking property owners to reduce their use of lawn fertilizer and controlling stormwater runoff as ways to reduce nutrient loading in ponds. But with climate change and warming of our ponds, these are things that the average person doesn't have much control over, or do they? And I guess my answer to this is that everything that we do at the local level to improve the resiliency of our pond ecosystems will help them respond to what's going on with respect to climate change and warming. It will make them better able to adapt to those changes. And so I strongly encourage property owners to really carefully examine their use of fertilizers, looking at runoff into the ponds from their properties, consider buffer zones between your properties and the ponds. Most of the town health and conservation departments provide recommendations on how you can protect your ponds. And I think that they're really well done, and I would recommend following them. And they certainly will make a difference. I think when it comes to protecting our ponds and having an impact on the bigger climate change issues, I think they're going to happen both from the top down at the higher levels and from the grassroots here at the bottom. And so anything that we all can do, and as a community, what we can do, I think that they can all make a difference. Next question. We have seen what appears to be an increase in the growth of water plants in our ponds. Some of us think is natural, but is it bad for our pond? Why does it occur, and what can be done about it? And I would say that in many cases, the overgrowth of plants in our pond is natural and is not bad for the pond. And I have prepared a slide here just to help you understand the succession of a lake or a pond of this nature, the kind we have out here. And what we see is at the top, you have a deep, clear pond where, again, that water has intersected that depression left in the earth by the receding glacier and the ice blocks left behind. And that then slowly colonizes with plants along the shoreline. But as that plant community develops, what we see is that the shoreline begins to encroach on the pond, and the bottom begins to form those layers of mud that I was talking about earlier, and again, I'm talking here on geologic time scales. For the most part, these things are happening over long periods of time, in most cases longer than our lifetimes. Although some of these changes, if you're hitting it at the right time, you could see this succession from, say, the top to the middle, or from the middle towards the bottom. We can see these things happen potentially in our lifetimes. But this is natural succession of these types of features on our landscape. And so over time, the plants really do take over, and the deposition of mud, which is really formed by decaying plant matter into the ponds. And so that continues to build and build and build year after year after year. And eventually these ponds will disappear and become part of the landscape again. And so that is a natural process that we expect in our ponds. And along the landscape of Cape Cod, we have ponds that are at all different stages in this process. We have ponds that still look like these early stages because of their size and depth. They've maintained that look for a longer period of time. And we also have ponds that are reaching sort of the end of their successional stages. And that is through a natural process. So it looks like eutrophication, and by the definition of eutrophication, it is, which means that there's this over excess of vegetation and nutrients in the pond, but that is a natural state. On the other hand, there is an unnatural state of growth of plants in our pond, which again is referred to as eutrophication. And that is generally driven by the increase of nutrients coming from the landscape, from the watershed, moving into the ponds through the groundwater. And that process is unnatural, and where we would like, why we would suggest reducing fertilizer use, maintaining your septic systems by having them maintained on a regular routine basis annually or every other year. These are all things, again, that buffer zone between your property and the pond. These are all things that can help improve eutrophication in a pond that's driven by an over excess of nutrients coming from the landscape. The second part of this question is, are there invasive plant species present here on the Cape that we should look for? Yes, there certainly are. We are fortunate in Cape Cod National Seashore to have almost no invasive species in our ponds. We do monitor very closely for them. But some of the common ones that you might see are the Phragmites, the tall reeds on the edge of the pond, some milfoil species. We also have a native milfoil species, which is hard to distinguish from the invasive. So definitely be aware of our native species. But yes, throughout the Cape, there are invasive species, and we can follow up if that's something that you need more information about. But I'm sure locally, through your conservation department, you can learn more about the invasive species in your pond. All right, next question. What can be done to address eutrophication in a pond? And is there a way to control or reduce the process in a pond? Those of you who have been here for a long time and engaged in these discussions about our ponds for many years might be aware that phosphorus is a big concern for us in our ponds. And I know in Brewster, you guys have been doing some work to reduce phosphorus in some of your ponds. We also know that nitrogen is a big problem for our ponds, which is primarily coming from wastewater septic systems. And there is a Cape-wide effort to reduce these nutrients along the landscape, including into the ponds. The effort is primarily focused on the coastal waters, which are also experiencing eutrophication. But we've worked really hard to make sure that in that process, as this Cape-wide group really looks at eutrophication in our coastal waters, that they really expand that effort out to our ponds. And so there's a lot of work being done in towns across the Cape to reduce nutrients going into the ponds in various ways, including managing septic systems better, looking at municipal wastewater facilities, reducing fertilizer use, in particular phosphorus. In many cases, this has been widely accepted. Many of you will find that it's easy to buy detergents without phosphorus now. My Palmolive dish soap that I use is phosphate free. Fertilizers you can now buy as phosphate free, which you didn't used to be able to. So there's an industry developing over this a new understanding we have of the impacts of these things on our waters. In addition, some of you may have heard of alum treatments, aeration. These are all approaches that are being applied across the Cape to improve the quality of the waters in our lakes and ponds. And so Brewster is no different. They're definitely, all of that is going on there. And so with that, I thank you all for listening, and feel free to reach out. Thank you, Marty, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Sophia, thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to meeting you in person in the near future. Thank you also to our friends and members who joined our 2020 annual meeting. Your commitment to preserving the health, beauty, and recreational value of Brewster's lovely ponds is what fuels our programs, projects, and events. We look forward to seeing you at future events. Stay safe and have a happy rest of your summer.